Hi everyone! It's Journey to the West and it's the beginning of July. I'm V and I'm here with Jay.
Hey, I'm Jay.
And I'm here with Sen.
Hi everyone, I'm Sen.
And today we are here to talk about white flight / gentrification. To begin, Jay, can you give us a definition about ethnic enclaves or what they are right now?
So basically, an ethnic enclave is an area that has a high concentration of a specific ethnic group. It often also has a specific cultural identity and specific economic activity. So basically, anywhere where a lot of a certain group of people live or work. Some places that come to mind will be like Little Tokyo, Koreatown, Chinatowns, Filipino towns, basically anywhere you can find a large concentration of an ethnic group.
The origins of these towns may vary, but at the core, from doing my research on Asian American history, think these enclaves came from the racist policies, in terms of gerrymandering and all that in the past when it came to Asian immigrants coming here in the first place. There were a lot of rules in gerrymandering, like Asians were only allowed to own certain property and only they're allowed to live in certain areas. As a result, that led to these enclaves forming. And then the thing is, though, they aren't staying. Some of them are disappearing or being taken away. Dun 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 dun! That is what gentrification is. Oh my god, yo. Have you seen Brooklyn? Brooklyn is example of gentrification. And also, you could look in SoCal, some places are being gentrified, in NorCal, in Washington, in New York, in even Hawaii, even I would argue, personally, but overall, I think also white flight, a good example of white flight actually, although it's not completely, I don't know for sure if it's related to our ethnic demographic group, but in the US, Michigan was an example of white flight, in that, Michigan was hustling and bustling in, the 70s or 80s, I believe, because of, the car industry and such, but then now, after various reasons, white flight happened, now Detroit is considered a shithole, basically. But it consisted of people living in those places were those who were non-white, and so I don't know. I am tired of seeing hipster pho places. First of all, that were $10 for pho. Let's not. No, that is a travesty. That is what I see whenever I go to a place that is gentrified.
A lot of these cities, it's not just raising the price of housing because the people who used to live there can no longer afford to live there, but also people coming in, developing, starting businesses that don't cater to the local community, but are meant to bring in people from a higher income bracket, generally more affluent white people. So tying into what you said about the bougie pho places, there are all kinds of Asian fusion restaurants starting to pop up in Chinatowns across the country. And they're not necessarily even run by Asian people, but sometimes they are. And clearly, they're there to use the cultural backdrop of being in an enclave to give them cultural credibility, but they're pricing their items so high that the people who live there can't afford to. So it's basically almost like a tourist attraction, but food-wise.
Do you live in an area where there's a lot of gentrification, Jay? Or have you seen it yourself personally?
Yeah, I actually live really close to a Chinatown, so I can see this. I see the city slowly creeping in. There are actually a lot of luxury condo developments happening, not only in the Chinatown, but in the small enclave that I also live in. I suspect that not only is it because of greed, but because people aren't comfortable when there's a lot of an ethnic minority around. Actually, in my town specifically, the mayor has decided to jack up the tax for housing in an effort, I believe, to push out the Asians. Oddly enough, it's not really working because somehow I don't know how people can still afford to like own property here, but I'm going to guess it's because of multi-generational households that were able to stay here. The rent is kind of ridiculous. I got lucky in that my landlord is kind enough to not raise it too much, but there are plenty of luxury condos here as well that are quite difficult for people to afford.
As if housing wasn't expensive enough. Stan, got any experiences?
I mean, in my particular area that is an enclave, the councillor does actually try really hard to get the Vietnamese vote because it's kind of like, I think he has realized that, that vote kind of gets him into office. So he does actually show up at a lot of cultural events, and he actually wore an Ao Yai once, which was pretty interesting to say the least. And he even wore the hat too, which is pretty funny.
Please, not the rice hat.
No, like, that Ao Yai hat that people wear? The
Oh yeah,
turban, as they call it. Yeah,
oh, yeah,
that one.
Okay.
But yeah, I did remember seeing on the news in Sydney, in the western suburbs, which are kind of a little, I guess, more ethnic and economically not as good. But the council was trying to limit the ethnic or foreign language signs. So like Korean signs or Chinese language signs, they wanted not to get rid of them, but to make the words smaller and make the English title bigger, so to be more inclusive of more people, as they would say, which is just ridiculous at this point. There is really no issue with foreign language signs, because if they had an issue, then the Greeks and the Italians that were here before us Asians, they would have had probably more restrictions on their foreign language signing. I mean, I can't speak for the past, but no one goes into like a French restaurant and asks, why do you have everything in French? Why don't you have everything in English? Like,
or a Starbucks.
Yeah, no one feels confronted when they see that. I guess even Greek, which the lettering is different. I guess because our language is derivative of it, and people don't think that looks imposing to them, but for some reason, if they see, Asian languages shops lined up with the big signs, they feel afraid, which I think is stupid. And I can't believe any council would think that, like, Sydney has so many Asians in it. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, there's a Chinatown in another city. I think it's called Brisbane, which is just up north from there. I think it's the third largest city in Australia, and their Chinatown has like English and Chinese signage everywhere, like the street names. So I don't see why they can't just have both. They can't just deal with the signs as they are. But I think that this is just one step in many to start gentrifying areas. And this is under the guise of diversity.
As usual, we're not included in the diversity circle. Whew. But seriously, it boggles my mind what mental gymnastics some people will use to justify gentrification and all that stuff. And then...
Basically, I just wanted to mention some historical instances of this happening. I guess we can start with the most notable of all. A lot of people, when they think of Japanese internment, they just think of rounding people up and keeping them in camps. But another part of that is the U.S. government seizing everybody's assets, which include a lot of private property. The U.S. government seized about $500 million worth of property from those who were interned, and the rest was damaged or stolen by the time they got out of the camps. Similar thing happened in Canada. They had their own internment, and the Canadian government liquidated property and sold it for around 2.5 million. So it's not just the subtle things that we talk about that are used to push people out of their communities. It's also government policy, like internment, that ends up being a land grab and forcing people away from where they live. And a lot of places that used to be Japanese ethnic enclaves no longer exist because there was no way for these people to rebuild when they came back, which is really unfortunate and completely altered the history and composition of our country. Another similar thing I'd like to talk about is outright racial animosity. For instance, the Watsonville riots in 1930 specifically targeted Filipino men with racial violence that resulted in vandalism of the businesses where they worked, who hired Filipinos, as well as abuse and death of Filipinos. And so many were afraid of the violence that they moved back to the Philippines because they didn't want to die, obviously. So not only is it an economic threat, but also actual threats of physical violence that ethnic minorities experience and are pushed out of their own communities.
In a nutshell, we have to deal with getting our land taken away and no one giving it back. That's US history in a nutshell, guys. Take all from the Japanese, the Asians, the Filipinos, the Chinese, everybody. Oh, only give them 10 cents back, after interning them or doing bad stuff. Great. Not really.
I mean, they are great at stealing land. That's what they do.
Truth right there.
Imperialism and colonialism.
Yeah, and then it's so upsetting because when I grew up in the hood, all I wanted was just to live in a nice, safe place. And I'm like, why couldn't I used to be that kid who was like, why couldn't my place be like that? But then I realized a lot of people, I think, who are in poverty or working class don't recognize that the reason why they're in poverty and working class is because of white American society and its systematic policies that are there to keep you in certain places in poverty that will ensure you won't get into neighborhoods like Bellevue, Washington, or Beverly Hills or Upper East Side Manhattan. So it's pretty insidious. And if you don't if you even build up your community, I remember reading a story about what happened in Irvine. Irvine, there was white flight, but then a whole bunch of Chinese or other immigrants came in, and they built up a community for themselves. And now people be all mad and salty about it, apparently. Happened to K-towns, even Brooklyn or Washington. Come on, let's be real. There's something going on. And so I want to delve into this topic of white flight. Don't you hate it, guys, how white flight is basically there's a consequence refusing to bow down to white supremacy and put up with this shit, bettering your town somehow, and then a whole bunch of people get all mad about it.
Jay posted an article on Twitter about white flight, and again, a lot of the reasons why white people say they leave enclaves, there could be a million reasons. They say, well, these immigrants are poor, they don't assimilate, they don't speak English, they don't speak our language. And it's not just with Asian communities, although we are pretty heavily affected. I know a friend's dad who is really racist, and he was given the home, so he didn't even buy it, by his mother, and a lot of people of Sudanese descent started moving into that neighborhood, and all the white people left. And then that is cited, well, these immigrants are poor, that's why we left. But then reading the article that Jay linked, it was we are model minority, but even we aren't spared that type of thing. And even though we are considered more assimilatable, it's still not enough for these white people to live alongside us because they just don't want to. That is really what it is.
Yeah, at the end of the day, whether it's gentrification or, white flight, the goal is to get away from these ethnic minorities. White people can't handle actual diversity. And a quick summary of that article, it was actually talking about how suburbia in the US is a lot more diverse than it was decades ago, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of interaction between ethnic groups because it's super segregated. The same people who say that they want diversity in schools or in their communities are the same people who are leaving because now there are too many, for example, Asians here, that the town looks different. It's just not the same because the demographics have changed and they're not okay with that.
Imagine being in like a city like New York and San Francisco where on one hand you see a whole bunch of severe poverty, but then on the other hand, somehow, isn't it weird how neighborhoods like Upper East Side and Presidio stay pristine and clean? Huh, that's so weird, but not a coincidence. And another thing, when it comes to like people talking about diversity in their neighborhoods and then like it's only like a certain level of diversity. It almost feels like they're virtue signaling. They're not really wanting diversity. They're just saying, "Oh, I want diversity because it's politically correct," you know? Kind of a sad thing.
Well, they don't really want it. They just want tokens. They don't. When they see us gathering up and forming communities, they get really anxious because of replacement. I mean, they were fine with us living in inner city ghettos for a long time, but then when they wanted that prime real estate back, there they are to gentrify it. When we're moving into suburbia, which is where they escaped to back in the day, now they don't want to live there either. So, they don't want us near them.
They just want us to serve them food. They don't want to actually live with us.
That's what they always say when they go, "Oh, I love diversity. I love the ethnics. Like, I like the food." And it's like, okay, what else?
Suburbia, by the way, sucks. Me personally visiting suburbia, seen Bellevue, Washington, man. You may have like more non-white people moving into Bellevue, but I'm like, suburbia is meant to isolate people. The thing is, I feel like when we talk about our identity and it comes to like Asian Americans, I feel like part of the problem is the fact that we have suburbia in the first place that is meant to like isolate societies. And here's the thing, like I really want to point out the reason why I want to talk about white flight and gentrification. It's because like somehow the way you live and your housing is representative of your economic status somehow. Like when you live in a clean, pristine suburb, it's like in a way you made it. I think the whole idea is that when it comes to us forming our communities, like we're forming our communities because we no longer like have a home. I'm not saying we don't have a home, but we're away from Asia now. My parents at least are, so we're trying to make a home for ourselves. What's wrong with that?
There isn't any support. Ethnic enclaves are really important for us to preserve because it's how communities support each other, basically. I think those are my final thoughts.
When you're observing, I guess, the two major topics we talked about, which was gentrification and white flight, is that we don't get to really decide where we live. It is a matter of the choice of white people and the government, whether they do it in very subtle ways by telling us to take down our ethnic signage, or they do so by having all these like hipsters come in, which again, the government doesn't do that, but they do that. But when these hipsters come in and open up their like shitty fusion restaurants with their crap take on our culture, and by the politics of the time, the housing might cost more just to try and push us out. But I guess it's frustrating because it doesn't feel like we really can anchor ourselves anywhere unless we really fight for it. And I think things like artifacts like statues and in the way Chinatown at least particularly builds themselves is to be very, unmistakably Chinatown. So I'm not saying that is a preventative measure, but it's something that we have to, I think, advocate for. Like, I know, like, Vietnamese communities in Australia, for example, have many statues erected for the refugees to remember them and remember those that lost their lives at sea. So at least that's something that will constantly remind people that we exist and we live here and we are a part of society and not just some kind of, remainder or someone to just push out at will.
Last words. Yeah, I don't like $10 pho or banh mi. No.
$10 is actually not bad because you guys have cheap ass food. Like, over here, $10 is like, it will never happen. It would probably be like 15 like Australian dollars or something.
Rip. So yeah, in a nutshell, you gotta fight for your rights. In order to save up, society don't got your back. Do something about it. So this is it. I'm V. I'm taking a social media break right now, so I don't know. It'll be a hiatus, but yeah, I'm V. And I'm here with Jay.
I'm Jay. My Twitter is J_MARAAN.
And Sen.
Bye, I'm Sen. You can find me on Twitter, Sentient, in the description.
Alright, and that's JttW. See you guys.